Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I'm going to explain how I annotate. I watched a whole bunch of videos on other people and how they annotate before I started annotating my books because I like the idea of being able to go back into a book and figure out what I was thinking at the time or remember quotes. Once upon a time I sporadically kept a notebook when I was reading different books full of quotes that I liked. I remember very specifically writing down quotes from A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, which would put my sporadicness at about 2016, this time of year, because I went to South Africa in the summer of 2016 and I wanted to read that book before I went. Kind of a necessity, at least to me. Anyway, I know I have that notebook, but it's probably in the other room, and since I moved, I really don't know where I put it. But at some point I did have a notebook, but that was kind of a hassle because it had to be something outside of the book, so I had to remember something external, and then I had to write down the actual full quote. About 3-4 months ago, I started feeling like maybe I wanted to annotate my books. I don't mind writing in books. I've been doing it since high school, college, because one of my teachers in high school told me, well, told us, the class, that you weren't interacting with your text if you weren't writing in it, or at least writing about it. For example, when we took AP English, we had to read 6 different classics by authors we hadn't read, and I cheated a little bit. I read a play by Shakespeare. I read a comedy though, and I hadn't read a comedy before, so that was my excuse. Anyway, we had to read 6 classics and keep a notebook about them with words that we learned, quotes that we liked, themes that we noticed, and just our general reactions. I don't think I have that notebook anymore. If I do, I'll let you know in July when my parents bring the rest of my stuff out, because that's where it is. But I remember, first of all, I remember reading War and Peace and Les Mis at the same time, which is, as I've said, a mistake. Second of all, I remember really enjoying doing that. But again, now that I'm not doing it for class, it's hard to keep something external, and that's a lot to do if you're not doing it for class. So I decided I would look up videos on annotating. I remember watching Autumn of Pelennors, or Abby's videos. I remember watching Kaz from a Little Book Owls video, and I liked how they did it. Kaz has a very complex system. I think she uses 12 different colors for very specific things, and she has different methods, which I think is great. So if you're looking to start annotating, definitely go check her video out. I will link both of them down below. But I'm not quite that complex. She writes down things like plot points, her theories about the books. She'll note certain characters if there's a word she doesn't know how to pronounce. And I don't do that because I can usually remember the characters pretty well, and that's not what I wanted to annotate my books for. However, out of the multiple videos that I watched, I realized that it's basically however you want to do it. I did get some good tips on the tabs though. Long explanation aside, I started tabbing and I just went, or started annotating, and I went to Target and bought just a 5-pack of tabs. I bought these tabs. They're just Post-its. They're kind of expensive. It's almost $3 for 100 tabs, which I don't like, but now that I've started using these colors, I don't want to switch, which is what I would have to do, and I can't really find any that are terribly cheaper. So I'm probably just going to stick with these. I don't annotate that many books, which means that these should last me long enough. But as I explained briefly in my book review on Earth, I only have 5, but these 5 work well for me. I started annotating when I read Becoming back at the end of January, beginning of February, and the orange ones are my snarky comments. I'm a very sarcastic person, as I've mentioned, and so a lot of my comments are just, they're things that sometimes I wouldn't say out loud because people would take them the wrong way, and sometimes they're just things that are me attacking the idea behind the sentence, or agreeing with them but being really snarky about it. For example, in Becoming, there's one that says, "The piece quoted from an angry and inflammatory sermon from the Reverend Jeremiah Wright that he had delivered many years earlier regarding the treatment of blacks in our country. intimating that Americans cared more about maintaining white supremacy than they did about God. And my comment says, is he wrong? Sucks and it's dumb, but is he wrong? Make America great again. Because it's sad, but it does seem that our country is leaning that way. So it's things like that, and sometimes they're less angry about that. For example, at the beginning of the book, she says that the White House address, which is, that does not tell me, something about Pennsylvania Avenue, she said that that is the most famous address in the world, and I disagree, because number 10 Downing, anyone recognize number 10 Downing Street? Kind of important. But I think a lot of people do know the Pennsylvania address, whatever that is. So there's certain ones that are just me being sarcastic and kind of funny, and there's some that are just me being very angry and sarcastic. The next color is purple, which is my personal references, personal relation to the book, or some sort of pop culture reference. For example, I absolutely adore StarKid, and I watch a lot of their things. I actually am in the middle of Spies Are Forever right now, which is technically Tin Can Brothers, but there were some Star Kids in that. Anyway, so purple tends to be a lot of the songs that pop into my head or quotes. For example, one of my personal references in Becoming is where she says that they held brother-sister boxing matches in the kitchen using the gloves their father had given them for Christmas. I started kickboxing in college. I haven't continued it, although I would love to, and so I have a set of boxing gloves, and when I lived at home, my parents bought a hanging bag that I used to work out, and then my dad started using it, so he bought gloves, and basically it turned into my dad and I seeing who could hit it harder or kick it harder. He can hit it harder, I can kick it harder. And then it sort of ended up with us jokingly going at each other, and occasionally we would actually land hits. He bopped me on the nose once, which was surprising. Or, as far as pop culture goes, this one is old, but as you may not know actually, I very much so love shows from the 60s to the 90s. For example, the Dick Van Dyke Show, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the, well, not the, Murder, She Wrote, Gilligan's Island, those kind of things. They are some of my favorite. The original Hawaii Five-0 with Jack Lord? Yes. The new Hawaii Five-0, not so much. I can't stand the guy who plays Danny. Ugh. Well, not the guy, the character. I can't stand him. Anyway, so in Becoming, she mentions that she preferred the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and I just have yes with an exclamation mark and a heart. So those are the kind of references that I use for the purple. And then green is the historical references. So things like if they mention Genghis Khan or Elizabeth I or Nelson Mandela, which Michelle Obama does mention because she got to meet him, which is amazing, and I'm so jealous. In Earth, which I also annotated, there's a lot of historical references. I will link my review down below if you would like to see it. But for example, I have a green sticky where it says, and it is the poor who in the end are caught in the middle. Because it is always the poor who suffer the most. Always. And history will bear that out. I also have one where it talks about the Ogallala Aquifer in North America. Mind you, again, Earth was written in the 1990s. Well, it was written in 1989 and published in 1990. Let's be very specific about that. I also have one where it says there's evidence that Mars once had water, and so the tab simply says RIP Mars rover, because that was when it died and everybody was really sad about a machine that had died on Mars. And I thought that was funny and it was appropriate. That's what I use the green tab for. And then the blue tab I use for quotes. Just straight up quotes that I like, that I think are powerful or funny. Usually they're powerful in some way. But then again, sometimes they're just funny. For example, in Earth, men were, after all, inherently weasels. And I just love that line because it is hilarious. In Becoming, let's see. Becoming has a lot more tabs, but this one really resonated with me, and it says inspiration on its own was shallow. You had to back it up with hard work. So there's just different types of quotes, but ultimately blue is quotes. And then pink is questions that I have. In Earth, it was more often, I questioned what that word meant because I learned a lot of words like coronophilia, which is the love of thunder and lightning and thinking they're really beautiful. Didn't know that word before I read the book. It's spelled with either a K or a C, it depends on who you ask, and I'm not sure why. But anyway, pink is questions. Sometimes they're questions about, well, what actually happened? Sometimes they're questions about history or what have you. One of the questions in Becoming was when she's talking about the Quaker philosophy and finding a school for their children. And I said, there's Quaker schools in the 21st century? Because that's not something that occurred to me. For me, Quakers are people that were around in the 18th and 19th centuries, and I'm sure they're still around now, obviously, but it wasn't a philosophy or a religion that I realized had such a big influence even today. And so that was a question that I had. Sometimes they can be more of realization type questions. And then in Earth, I have one where there is a Zeppelin, because apparently Zeppelins are big in this imagined future. And I think I was reading I was watching Doctor Who at the time I was reading the beginning of this book, and so there's an episode where they go to an alternative universe, and there's Zeppelins everywhere over London. I asked why it was always Zeppelins, because that just seems like an odd choice of transport. Like a giant balloon. Why a giant balloon? I don't understand, but apparently Zeppelins are a big thing. Sometimes they're fun questions, sometimes they're serious, sometimes they're more realizations. It just depends on the book and the context. Anyway, I only use those 5 colors, and I do actually write in my book. I have matching colored pens for each of those colored tabs, which is part of the reason I don't want to change, because the other one I found is yellow instead of purple, and I can't write with a yellow pen because you can never see a yellow pen. That's what I do. I have 5 colors, 5 tabs, 5 pens, and I write in my books. I put the tabs in. The tabs do lift the ink of older books. For example, they lifted ink of Earth, but they did not lift the ink off of Becoming. And so just, if you're going to use those tabs, be wary of that, but it doesn't bother me enough to find different tabs. I also really like the transparency of them. That is how I annotate my books. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have questions, leave them down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.